up, everyone? Welcome to the Big Ten Football Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Zach Guggenheim. We're going to be doing the Week 2 recap, big weekend of games that we got to see. Make sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, YouTube. Send me emails at big10footballtalk@gmail.com. Tweet at me or X me or whatever it's considered now. Instagram me. I'm on both those platforms. And a couple notes before we get into the recap, power rankings, playoff bracket, all that good stuff. One, I want to thank you all. We hit 50,000 plays this past weekend. And yeah, I'm still kind of blown away by that and just very, very grateful. And that's just on Spotify. YouTube has had a bunch others. In fact, a video just hit 1,300 views. So make sure you go over to YouTube and subscribe there. But just really, really grateful for you all. The other note is that I was in a bracket of best Big Ten podcasts that Boatwagon won, set up, and I got murder, death, killed by that one by the solid verbal. But thank you to all of you who voted, who shared. I still got quite a few votes. It was a bloodbath by the end, but you guys, the fact that I have any votes, the fact that I was even considered for this thing was just a major privilege. I advanced a round, like I got to the second round. So to all of you who voted and to Boatwagon to putting that together and considering me as a source for Big Ten media, I am very, very grateful. I kind of pinch myself still that this is something that people want and that people listen to, and just really grateful for you all. So all that being said, it's time for some recap. And it was a bit of an odd week for the Big Ten. I thought certain teams, really punched, really surprised, right? And really made a statement. Illinois upsetting Kansas. I'm still kind of kicking myself for not picking Kansas or for not picking Illinois. I picked Kansas. I'm kicking myself because I remember watching them a little bit and seeing the box score against Eastern Illinois. I was like, man, I really want to pick Illinois, but I think Kansas is just a little bit better. They made Jalon Daniels really pay. 3 picks, just great performance by the Illini. Nebraska, of course, blanking Colorado in the first half. And I think there's more issues in Colorado than people want to admit, or maybe at least that Deion Sanders wants to admit. I think he might be the problem, but that's neither here nor there. I'll own up to the fact that I gave Deion quite a bit of love last year. It has not looked good. Has not looked good for Deion. Has not looked good for Shedeur. Not a good look for Shedeur walking off the field 2 minutes left in the game. I don't know what was up. I'm not going to make a judgment call. I'm just saying it doesn't look good. But Nebraska looks great. And they won the game the way I thought they would, which is they didn't put the game simply in Dylan Raiola's hands. They really relied on defense, special teams, strong running game, strong line play. Tommy Hill with a big interception return to really close the door at 14-0. And they just kind of ran it up in the first half and they just kind of sat on the lead. So, really good on Nebraska. Nebraska's in the top 25 for the first time in a long time. And Illinois knocking on the door. I believe they were 26th in the AP poll, the highest vote getter without actually breaking the poll. So good on Illinois. Big time for both those programs. Other schools I thought just choked away victories, right? Or they choked away and lost. Northwestern, I thought should have, had a real chance to win that game. I won't give them too much of a hard time because I think Malik Murphy and Manny Diaz really figured out that you could attack the back seven particularly the secondary, and they had playmakers that the back four couldn't really stop. I left feeling much more concerned about Mike Wright as a quarterback for the Wildcats. I don't think he played really well. In fact, I know he didn't play very well. There were a number of dropped interceptions, and if it weren't for those drops, Duke probably wins that game going away. Instead, they had a chance to win that game with, in the second overtime. And I thought their game plan in overtime was fantastic. And then sometimes you just outsmart yourself. Zach Lujan, the new offensive coordinator, who has been really good, was really good at the FCS level, rival coach to David Braun back in the day. And they have it 3rd and 1, and I'm thinking you're going to run this in for a touchdown with Porter. You're going to run it in for the 2-point conversion, and you're going to win. And instead, what happens is they run some sort of quarterback counter or some sort of quarterback sweep that just gets blown up in the backfield and it's 4th and 9. And I can understand the play call. I know some people, Northwestern fans, are probably like, I can't believe they called that. I can understand it. You're trying to catch them off guard. You're trying to score a touchdown. You're trying to maybe set things up for the 2-point conversion. But I just think when you have a good thing going, you stick with your bell cow. You stick with what got you there. And, hindsight's 2020, but it was a bad call and they lost the game because of it. And they got to own up to it. I think another team that choked away, and it's much more inexcusable, is Iowa. And I'm disappointed in Kirk Ferentz. I'm disappointed in Cade McNamara. I think Cade McNamara was solid in the first quarter, solid in the first part of the second quarter. And then he was abysmal for the rest of the game. And I saw Kirk Ferentz after the game saying, well, we're still waiting for Cade McNamara to really step up. Okay, if you're still waiting, it's time to make a switch. And listen, I thought Cade looked good in the second half against, I forget the Illinois State, I think it was. I thought he looked good in the second half. I thought he looked good in the first quarter. But listen, if you are still not sure whether he can be QB1, what are you doing keeping him in? Like, it's time to make a switch. And it's inexcusable to lose when your top back, Caleb Johnson, runs for 187 yards and 2 touchdowns on 25 carries. Like, and to have a 13-0 lead when you're Iowa, when you have the defense that you have, and you choke away the game that way. Inexcusable. And so Cade McNamara was not good. And Kirk Ferentz, he needs to look himself in the mirror because, this is now a multi-year problem where Iowa cannot get offense when they need it the most. And again, because Iowa has no good offense, no good option at passer for the past several years now, their margin for error is just super slim. And Iowa State had playmakers that could make you pay. And they held them for 2.5 quarters, and they were phenomenal. That defense was phenomenal for 2.5 quarters. And Matt Campbell is too good of a coach to just kind of stay there. And he exploited them, exploited their back seven, got their playmakers into a rhythm, and they were able to win that game. And so Iowa State's a good team. Iowa State's a good team, and you'll see that in my playoff rankings later in the show. But this is a tough pill to swallow. Michigan, super disappointing. And I think where I'm most disappointed in is the defense. They struggled to tackle. The front four struggled to get pressure on Quinn Ewers. Now, Quinn Ewers did a great job at maneuvering the pocket. He avoided several sacks, but Josiah Stewart, Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, those guys are all going to be top 3-round picks. You know, Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham most assuredly are going to be first-round picks. And they couldn't get a sack. That's not good. I mean, Texas in the first half made Michigan look just exceedingly average as a defense. And that is not even at all taking account on how abysmal they looked offensively. Donovan Edwards is not a bell cow. He's again, I don't want to disparage him too much because I think he is a good player and he has certainly been big in spots. But the reality is he is not RB1. He's not the guy that can carry this thing 20 to 25 times and be a difference maker. He is a guy who can make splash plays, but you need a Khalil Mullings. And more importantly, you need a Blake Corum. You need a Hassan Haskins type back to really carry this load. The offensive line's a mess. Davis Warren is not good enough. And I say this with all respect to him, knowing what he's been through. Good for him that he's the starter. The reason why he's the starter is because Alex Orji did not live up to expectations. Point blank. And Michigan has some significant issues that they're going to have to be careful with. And, I'm going to pop off here for a minute. So just looking at the schedule, Michigan, I'm concerned about Michigan for this reason. You get USC in 2 weeks. You get Minnesota in 3. You go to Washington. Now, I'm not sold on Minnesota. I'm not sold on Washington. But what I saw on Saturday, I'm not so sure that they're better than those teams right now. Right? And then they get a bye week. They go to Illinois. I'm not sure they're better than Illinois right now. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. I want to see them against USC. They get Arkansas State next week. Then they get Michigan State at home. They get Oregon at home. They go on the road to Indiana. Then they finish with Northwestern and at Ohio State. Like, I had them finishing 10-2. I had them losing to Texas. Not like that. Like, listen, I'm going to give Michigan the benefit of the doubt in my power rankings. But this team, if they don't get their act together, they look average on defense. They look like subpar offensively. Like, we're looking maybe more at 7-5, 6-6 if they don't right the ship and get something going offensively. Because this defense is not where they were a year ago. And I know, like, Texas is, I think, really good. I'm not sure that defense, though, that defense struggled. Like, they're lucky it wasn't 31-3 at half. That first drive got derailed by a phantom hold, I think, or something. And it was a problem that Michigan was unable to get anything going offensively that hurt the defense and kept the defense on the field. But Texas had no problem moving the ball in the first half. No problem whatsoever. That defense has real issues, and that offense is not helping it out whatsoever. So I'm very concerned. Oregon is another team I'm really concerned about. They could not stop Ashton Gianti. And granted, Ashton Gianti is going to do that to a lot of teams this year. But again, Oregon offensively was very sluggish. They had more explosive plays this time around, but and listen, Boise State, they'd never beaten Boise before. But Boise State is Like, I think they're good, but I think a good team would blow them out. Like, I think a good team is gonna be able to hold them and beat them by multiple scores. Oregon is not a good team right now. I think Dylan Gabriel is playing good, but again, not a ton of explosiveness. The defense now all of a sudden has concerns. The offensive line has a tough time in pass protection. Like, this is a rough time. Oregon is not who we thought they were right now. Now they got a lot of transfers. They need time to gel, but that is something that we need to keep an eye on. Penn State's another one. Penn State, I understand you might sleepwalk after a big win on the road, but that was rough. That was a rough game for you. And it was like a tale of two halves. In the first half, Penn State stunk defensively. 24 points to Connor Bazelak, former Indiana and Missouri quarterback. 24 points in the first half. And it was both running and passing that defense allowed 24 points. In the second half, it was like Penn State started to fall asleep on the offensive side of the ball. Harrison Wallace was nowhere to be found, right? The guy who was big play man against West Virginia, 0 catches in this game. Drew Aller looked, felt like he regressed from a week ago. The running game was great, but, to only escape and really escape with a win by 7 at home, I get it. You're sleepy. Noon kickoff against a MAC team after you dominate a Power 4 opponent on the road. I get it. I don't care if you're sleepwalking. 7 points to Bowling Green is not good enough. Okay? So here's my point in all this. The Big Ten was touted as a really, really good conference this year, like a hair below the SEC. Right now, it's Ohio State, USC, and everybody else. Now, granted, I think Nebraska played really well. I think Illinois played really well. Rutgers, continues to improve. Although I still have a little concern about Kaliak Manis after the past couple weeks. He started slow, both in their first 2 games. Maryland lost to Michigan State, and great for Michigan State, but Maryland, I've been telling you, I don't trust Mike Locksley, and you lose at home to a team that nobody thinks is going bowling this year. They might go bowling now because they beat Maryland, but you picked off Aiden Childs 3 times and you could not win. Wisconsin struggled again against South Dakota. This conference is mid right now. And there's a reason, before everybody gets mad at the AP poll, having 6 out of the top 7 teams being SEC teams, who in the Big Ten are you putting in the top 7 besides Ohio State? I can't justify USC. Not after Nicholls State put up 20-some points on LSU. LSU dominated them, but still. And USC, I think they're really good. That's not a shot at USC. I think Penn State sleptwalked. I think Oregon's going to get it together. But on the whole, if we're talking SEC versus Big Ten, this was a bad week for the conference. Really good week for a couple of key teams, right? Indiana, I don't care who you are, and they played a bad team in Western Illinois. They are terrible. But to score 77, I don't know what the last time that Indiana has seen 77 points. So that's big for them. But that's an Indiana, that's great for Indiana. That's not gonna equate to the conference power game. Illinois, again, really good for them to beat a ranked team at home that bludgeoned them a year ago. Good for them. Minnesota getting back on track. Good for them. Michigan State getting a win on the road, good for them. But here's the reality of this. Most of those teams I just mentioned, they're competing to get into that next tier, into that tier 2 of teams in the Big Ten. My question is, who's challenging Ohio State, and who can challenge the upper tier of the Big Ten, or the upper tier of the SEC? Because I'll tell you right now, like, I think Wisconsin's going to get boat raced by Alabama next week. And I know Alabama just struggled against USF, but nothing I have seen from Wisconsin makes me think they have a shot next week. I hope they prove me wrong, but they have looked terrible. Okay? Like, Maryland is a poser once again. Good for them. Minnesota, I don't know if what they did this past week is going to equate to their bigger games. Iowa is probably not getting in the playoff with a loss to Iowa State. Like, I think they just killed their playoff chances. Michigan is in a heap of trouble. Oregon looks mid. Penn State looks mid. Like, I think it's very possible that Nebraska might end up being the third best team in the Big Ten if teams don't get better. And that's the key, right? I'm not saying that it all is lost, but I'm saying if what we saw this past weekend equates to the next, the rest of the season, I saw one elite team, one very, very good team in USC, a whole bunch of teams that are probably going to overachieve, and then a bunch of teams that, if they get in the playoff, they're going to get boat raced. Okay? So that I'm just being real with y'all, okay? Like, good for a lot of teams that did really well, but this was not a good week for the Big Ten. Okay, now I'll get into my power rankings. One silver lining, though, before I say that, although it's probably going to end up going to a different power conference, the playoff just gained a spot that a Big Ten team could get to because of Notre Dame's loss to Northern Illinois. Notre Dame is not getting in the playoff. And honestly, I'm not sure they get past Purdue next week. I at this point, I'm picking Purdue, because nothing I've seen from Notre Dame has made me think, oh yeah, they're a power team. Certainly, like, I don't know why they're in the top 25 this week, because Texas A&M's overrated. And then they just got beat by 2 against, an okay MAC team. So, good job, Notre Dame. I feel bad for Marcus Freeman, man, but it is what it is. Power rankings. 18, I can't move UCLA out of that spot until I see more. They almost lost to Hawaii a week ago. I'm curious to see what happens in their game against Indiana next week. Wisconsin, I've got it 17. And I know people say, but other teams lost, and I get that. But man, does Tyler Van Dyke look mid. And listen, I just, like, Ches Malusi is supposed to be their bell cow. Like, against South Dakota, they had 171 yards on 41 carries. That's a little more than 4 yards a carry. Tyler Van Dyke looks lost at times at quarterback. I mean, they just look terrible, man. And they've played 2 not very good teams, right? Western Michigan, like, they were leading in the fourth quarter last week. And we just saw what happened with Western Michigan against Ohio State. There's more on that in a minute. Maryland at 16. Again, JR on the Big Ten Huddle made a really good point that he thought the lines, Michigan State had the advantage in the trenches. And I kind of was like, I don't know about that. Listen, not only did they have an advantage in the trenches, but they were more resilient. Again, Childs didn't, he had a lot of yards, and he set them up for a game-winning field goal. He threw 3 picks. You shouldn't win games or you should be able to win the game when the opposing quarterback throws 3 interceptions. You're at home, and you can't win against, honestly, a lower tier team in the Big Ten. Like, I had a tough time picking between Maryland and Wisconsin, 16 and 17. Minnesota at 15. again, I know they lost to UNC a week ago and they only played Rhode Island, but at least they did what I wanted them to, which was they threw the ball and they got Max Brosmer more comfortable and they were convincing. That's more than I can say for Wisconsin. Okay. Got Northwestern at 14. I'm putting them there because I think their front seven for their defense is really good. And I think it's a toss up for me between Northwestern and Minnesota right now. I think the offense is a real concern. I would put Minnesota there above Northwestern in a week if I see Minnesota continue to progress in the passing game and they continue to play well. Minnesota next week has Nevada. I think that'll help me kind of figure that out. Northwestern has Eastern Illinois. They should win that game pretty handily. But there might be a flip there next week. Michigan State at 13. I'm still not convinced with Aiden Childs, but I'm curious about how a win on the road kind of breathes life into this program. And Aiden Childs is still young. Like, that's the thing about him. He has been inconsistent. He has made a lot of poor decisions, but he's young. And with every rep, he's going to get better. Like, the talent is there. And he's got a good receiver in Nick Marsh, who had a big time game this past weekend against Maryland. So Michigan State, again, I don't know what's going to happen with them. I still wouldn't be surprised if they don't make a bowl game, but Michigan State, had a big time win, and you got to give a lot of credit to Jonathan Smith there. Heck of a coach, by the way. And I'm very excited about the future for the Spartans. 12, I got the Boilermakers, who had a bye, but listen, I mean, on virtue of how they looked in week 1 and how other teams looked, I've got them at 12. And I am curious what the line's going to be for them against Notre Dame. I'd imagine Notre Dame will be a favorite, but I don't think they should be that high of a favorite. I'm probably going with Purdue in that game. Indiana at 11. Again, I mean, they were solid in week 1, crushed, a really bad team in week 2, but they did what they should do, which is crush a really bad team. So good on Indiana, man. Like, they were, they did what they need to do, and they're instilling some confidence in that team. I've Washington at 10, again, kind of stumbling through some things, but the talent's there, right? Will Rogers, decent at quarterback, Denzel Boston, Jonah Coleman. I still like the upside of the Huskies, despite their roster turnover, and they're still trying to gel and get things together. 9, I've got Rutgers. They started a little sluggish against Akron. But ultimately they put Akron away, and I still really like this Rutgers team. I think Rutgers, they have an off week and then they go to Lane Stadium. I'm very curious about that game. Virginia Tech has not looked very good, and I picked Rutgers to lose that game early in the season. I might be swayed to go a different way next week. For number 8, I have Illinois. That defense was legit against Illinois or against Kansas. Kansas offensively, I know they don't have Kotelnicki anymore, but Jalen Daniels, some people, not many, but some were saying maybe dark horse Heisman contender. If anything, was an explosive playmaker who people were saying, hey, watch out for this guy. They made him look average. Defense played well. Luke Altmaier, again, I keep saying this, underrated quarterback, underrated guy. He was not super, explosive in this game. They didn't win the game because of the offense, but he didn't lose it, and he kept drives alive. And I'm really excited to see what happens with Illinois after that win. Like, it's maybe a tenure defining win for Brett Bielema, who kind of were maybe wondering, okay, is he on the hot seat this year? It's a big win, and that defense played huge because of it. 7, I have Michigan. Again, there was nothing good about that performance against Texas. And granted, it's Texas. They're a top 2 team in the country right now. But I did not see many good things out of them. 6, I have Iowa. Again, they looked really good for 2.5 quarters against a good team. They choked. And I'll give them credit in the power rankings in that I think if Iowa played Michigan right now, I think Iowa would win. But they have no one to blame but themselves for their loss. But that defense is nasty, man. It's really good again. And if they can just get adequate quarterback play, they would have won that game against Iowa State. So I still think they have some dangerousness to them. So Oregon at 5, again, there's just something off. I think they just need to gel. 4, Nebraska. That defense is nasty. Granted, I mean, Colorado's lines are terrible. So I am curious to see what Nebraska does moving forward. You know, Nebraska plays Illinois in 2 weeks. And that's going to be a fun game, maybe between 2 top 25 teams. That's going to be a fun game. And I am very excited for that one. That'll tell us a lot about both teams. Number 3, I have Penn State. I think they sleptwalked. They got it done when they needed to. Drew Aller made some plays. The running game was great, but there's some work to do there. USC number 2, they beat a bad Utah State team. Beat them, 48-0. Good for them. I have Ohio State 1. Now, before I go to my playoff rankings, I just want to make this point. I had USC above Ohio State last week, and both USC and Ohio State shut out their opponents. Here's why I put Ohio State above USC. I'm an Ohio State homer. No, that's not why. I know some might accuse me of that, but this is why. I saw things out of Ohio State this past week I've not seen in the past 5 years. Dominant run blocking, dominant perimeter run blocking, really crisp, disciplined play. And the reality is they could have named the score. And I'm sorry, no one in the Big Ten is beating that when they're clicking on all cylinders. And I'm not sure anybody beats that except Georgia and Texas. And I'm not even sure they can beat that. Now, there's one game. They got to do it game in and game out any given Saturday. So this is not me saying Ohio State's unbeatable. But what I'm saying is if Ohio State plays like they did on Saturday night, nobody's beating them in the Big Ten right now. That's without their best offensive lineman. That was without their top corner for most of the game because of just an awful, awful targeting call, which that officiating crew, they should be banned from. It was awful. I thought the refs were more competitive against Ohio State than Western Michigan. That's how bad the officiating was. And I'm not one to complain about officiating. I just don't I think USC is really good and I think they can still ascend. So this is not me saying USC can't beat Ohio State, whatnot. I just thought what Ohio State put on the field, I don't think anyone's beaten if Ohio State plays that way and other teams don't ascend. So my playoff bracket, my four conference champions, I did switch out Penn State for Ohio State. Otherwise, it's the same. Georgia, Ohio State, Miami, Utah. They're my top 4. Number 5 is Texas. I'll be honest. I thought Texas looked really good. I thought it was more Michigan bad than Texas being good. Now, I could be proven wrong, but part of the reason for that too is that Texas is playing with 11 new guys. They lost 11 starters last year. So they're playing with a bit of a new deck too. And what I saw, I was like, I'm not sure. I think Texas deserves to be number 2 in the poll because of what they did. and Georgia beat Clemson. So I'm all about that, but I still think Georgia's better than Texas, which is why I have Texas at 5. And of course, that's how the playoff works is if you're not a conference champion, you are not in the top 4. So Texas is 5. I do have USC 6 because I think the way USC's looked and the way the rest of the Big Ten has looked and the way Notre Dame looked, I think USC might be 11-1 by the end of the season. Like they look good and everybody else doesn't. Now, Penn State, USC looms large. USC, Michigan looms large. USC looks, I think is really good. And I think they will get a high playoff spot, a home playoff game. Ole Miss at 7, Missouri at 8, Tennessee at 9. I think Tennessee looked great. Their quarterback looked great, beat a good team in NC State. Penn State at 10. And my dark horse is Iowa State at 11. Boise State rounding out the top 12 as a group of 5 champion. I think they get a lot of credit for losing at the last second against Oregon. And I think that's going to show a lot to the committee saying, hey, this team went to Autzen and, balled out. And they've got playmakers that can give anybody a problem. So my first 4 out, Alabama. Now, before people are like, how are you saying Alabama is out of the playoff? It's not because they did struggle against USF. I think I'm just looking at the schedule and looking at their performance. And I'm like, I just think we're not going to see 6 teams from the SEC in the playoff. And I think Alabama has the hardest schedule. And I think they're going to be out. I've got Oregon out. And I think my next 2 out, Clemson and Syracuse. Kyle McCord's looked really good for Syracuse so far. Suspect competition. I think Georgia Tech was overrated because of the win over Florida State. And Clemson, I thought, rebounded quite nicely against App State. So, but that's my playoff bracket, the first 4 out. I think Notre Dame getting knocked out by Northern Illinois. Could they get back in? Sure, but they have a lot of issues that they got to work out before we can even talk about it. So that'll do it for this edition of the Big Ten Football Talk playoff. Podcast, not playoff. Clearly I'm tired from this past weekend, but thanks for listening. On the week 3 picks, we will have Eric Boggs from the OHIO podcast and Dylan Kuhn from the Boiler Express podcast. So make sure you tune in on Thursday morning, like and subscribe, send me emails, leave a review. Take care, and God bless.